Hey everybody, we've been getting a lot of requests for miniatures that are vintage and classic, so in this video we're going to be doing just that by having some fun. We're going to be painting a Space Marine back from 1992 in the colours of the Blood Angels of the time. So, not just red, but really bright red. And not gold, because that's not bright enough, we're going to be having yellow instead. And, of course, we're going to have a bright green base. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. Before we start painting the Blood Angel, we should take a look at the model we're going to be painting, because these have changed quite a lot over the years. And the one we're going to be using for an example is a metal plastic hybrid miniature, which, according to the tag that's in the base, was sculpted in 1992. And here he is. So the core of the body is metal, and then the arms and bolt gun and backpack are plastic. And when I was getting into the hobby back in '97, these miniatures were the coolest ones because they had really dramatic poses compared to the plastic miniatures, which were very stocky. They have grown quite a bit over the years, though, and you can see exactly what I mean as I compare it to a Blade Guard veteran, who you can see is actually substantially larger, and it's quite funny to see the comparison of how much they've changed over the years. But Blood Angels have also become a darker red over the years too, and so what we need to do to go back to the second edition feel is go back to that really bright scarlet red. And while to do that, the best thing to do is to undercoat the model with a red spray. And I've used Mephiston Red from Citadel, but you could use any that you want to, really. You could alternatively use a white undercoat to get a really bright red, but that can go almost pink, and it can take a bit of time to get a smooth finish to the red as well. So I find a red spray paint is a better starting point. Now the mid-tone for the armour of this colour scheme is actually a bright red. It's Evil Sunz Scarlet, and to apply it what you need to do is get hold of a larger brush, and I'm using a large dry brush from the Army Paint to do just that. And all you've got to do is get some onto your palette and thin it down as ever with just a touch of water just to ensure it's nice and smooth. And once you've done so, all you've got to do is start painting it all over the miniature. So I'm going to cover the entire thing, making sure I work the paint into all the nooks and crannies. And this is also a great opportunity to get any bits of the undercoat where I missed it. For example, just behind the bolt gun, there's a bit of silver of the metal showing there. So now's a great opportunity to catch those details. Once you've got that even red all across the armour, the next thing to do is to do some shading. And so for this, what we need is a wash, and I'm going to use a dark brown wash, Agrax Earthshade, and what we need to do is apply this into all the recesses of the armour. Now to do it, go for a smaller brush. I have a detail brush from the Army Painter, and I've switched to my regular palette to get this ready. And all you've got to do is just get a little bit of this and then just start painting it directly into those corners. Now whilst you're doing this, it's quite possible you'll make splashes, so once this sequence is done, feel free to go back to Evil Sunz Scarlet to neaten up again. But all we're looking to do is to run it into areas such as just like here to give some definition on these armour panels. I've finished applying the wash now and neatened back up using Evil Sunz Scarlet, and you can see there are a few details where I actually applied the wash all over those parts. For example, the shoulder pad trim and also the bolt gun. The reason for that is this is a visual cue for me to know which parts are going to be different colours other than the red armour, so as we highlight that red armour, we're going to highlight those parts as well unnecessarily. And the highlighting is what we're going to do now for that red power armour to make it really bright, and so to do this we're going to go up towards oranges to do it. The first highlight we need is Wild Rider Red, and to apply it I'm going to be using a small layer brush from Citadel. And with this, what we need to do is really make sure we got the paint prepared correctly on the palette, because we're going to be edge highlighting with it. So what you need to do is get some on there like that, and get some water and start mixing it in next to it. And using this, you can introduce either more pigment or more water, depending on what you need to get to the right consistency. And what we're looking for is to get it so the paint's flowing effortlessly from the brush for as long as possible. So on your palette, you can always start testing it by just doing some lines like this. And I can kind of feel already it's starting to get a little bit dry. In fact, you can see as I do it more and more, the line's becoming a bit rough and a bit faded. So I know it's not thinned down enough. So get a bit more water and mix that in there. So this is something that you'll just get with time. It's different from every paint really in every colour, but once you get the hang of it, you'll know exactly what you're looking for. So let's try now, see how far it goes. Okay, so this feels much smoother. It's going much further. You can see the lines narrower as well. So I know that that's a much better consistency for what we need to do here. So there we go, with that prepared, we can now start applying it to the miniature. And what we're looking to do is to put this onto all the sharper edges on that power armour. Now with old miniatures like this, something you're going to find very quickly is that a lot of the edges aren't actually very sharp because the model's so old. Sometimes you've got sharper edges, such as the brow and the helmet here, and in these cases what you can do is go for that trick where you use the side of your brush just to skim along those areas, such as just along there, and along here as well, to get a nice fine highlight running along that part like that. But oftentimes the detail is just not strong enough to do that. So what you need to do instead is use the tip of your brush and paint lines to create the illusion that it's sharper than it actually is. For example, on the back of the legs, you can see around these details just here, it's a very soft side just there. So what I'm going to do using the tip of the brush, is just start running along these edges very gently like this, just turning the model so I can keep just working my way down like this to get that highlight along that edge there. And it's just a matter of building it up until the colour's the strength you want it to be. Now to do this, you'll notice what I do is turn the model so I'm painting downwards because it's a very natural motion for your hand to do, so it's easy to control. And also you'll notice that my hands are really steady because I'm holding them right together. You'll see I've actually got my fingers really braced against each other like that, really gripping the handle. Sometimes as I work around the model, what I'll do is start moving it like that so I can reach these edges up here, but all the while the purpose of it is to keep my hands steady and braced against each other. Now my hands are actually quite high up because I've got my elbows braced on the table, and well, I've had a lot of practice to get used to doing this on camera like this, but if you're struggling with it, just really hold your wrists right now on the table because that really helps prevent any shaking. Anyway, all you need to do now is just start working your way around the miniature, looking for all the edges and picking them out like this. That edge highlight's been applied and you can see it's helping the details stand out. However, it's not quite bright enough just yet for second edition, so what we need to do now is do a second edge highlight, but this time with a brighter orange. Troll Slayer Orange is a great choice for this, and the application is very similar to the previous step, only more selective. What we're looking to do is to aim it on the sharper points of the detail. So go for a finer brush. I have a small layer brush here from Citadel. And just prepare your paint just like in the previous step, just looking for that sweet spot. And once you've got it to that stage, it's just a matter of looking for those sharper corners and picking them out. So the helmet's a great example for doing this. If you look at that forehead just there, it's a very sharp point. So what I'm going to do is just turn the model so we can access that area and just very gently start picking out that area there like that. It's not the entire brow, just that kind of point that's in the center there like that to emphasize it and make it just a little bit brighter around there. And it's really just a matter of doing this all across the armour, always looking for these sharper parts, such as the top of the mouthpiece just here, and just adding a bit of this colour to make them a bit brighter. And with that fine highlight applied, the bright red power armour of the classic Blood Angel is complete, and now we can move on to base coating some other colours on the model. So what we're going to do now is base coat all the black details on it using some Corvus Black, and then for all the silver we need some Leadbelcher. But first I'm going to be using Corvus Black, and to apply it I've got a regiment brush from the Army Painter, and with this all we've got to do is look for anything that we want to be black. So there's a few details scattered around the model, and just a matter of blocking it out with this colour. So for example, I want to begin by looking for all the joints in the armour, such as the ones on the backs of the legs just here, so areas such as that, just neatly block them in, being careful about that red armour as you get close to it. But also we want to look out for any cables and pipes, such as the one on the helmet just up here. There's also the casing of the bolt gun, and also you can do some black markings on the armour. Now in this case I'm going to be doing this knee pad down here black, but also I'm going to be doing the shoulder pad trim black as well, because back in the day this detail was black on Blood Angels too, and when doing this just be really careful, slowly approaching it side on like that, so your brush just catches that raised area of that trim. With the black done, we can now move on to base coating all the silver details using Leadbelcher, and this is going to be all the finer details on the bolt gun, for example the muzzle of the gun around here and also the clip down here. But in addition there's some silver details on the armour that we need to do at this stage too, and that includes things such as vents. For example, we've got this one around the backpack just here, and of course the mouthpiece as well, just around here. With those two colours blocked in, we're now ready to move on to applying a third base coat, and this is another metallic. It's actually going to be gold, and well, you'd be thinking at this stage there's actually quite a bit we could paint with gold because we've not done the chest design or the detail on the side of the bolt gun, but you would be wrong to think that we should paint these gold. There's actually another colour of the time that we should use for these, and we'll come back to that later on. The gold is actually for a really small detail, and it's just the shells in the bolt gun, so to apply it, you really don't need very much. I've gone back to that small layer brush from Citadel to apply this, and all you got to do is just get a little bit of this ready, making sure that your brush isn't overloaded, because the area we're looking at is just this little detail just in here. With that colour applied, we can now move on to washing all these details at the same time, and for this we now need a black wash. So Nuln Oil is the colour to use here, and to apply it I'm going to be using that regiment brush, and I'm also going to be using the palette again to help control how much I put on at once, because we need to avoid that red armour at this stage. So once you've got the right amount on your brush, not loads and loads, all you've got to do is start painting it over these colours. So we're looking at the black, the gold and the silver just painted all over it, so it runs into the recessed details like this. Once that wash is dry, we're then ready to move on to highlighting these details, and for this we just need two colours. First of all, Mechanicus Standard Grey for all the black, followed by some Stormhost Silver for the silver details. But first we need Mechanicus Standard Grey, and so it's time to go back to that small layer brush, and with this we're just looking for a small amount just to highlight the edges on all those black details, just like with the power armour really. So once you've got your paint thinned down to that amount that we had previously, all you've got to do is just start looking for those edges and gently pick them out. And a lot of these are on the plastic parts, which generally are a bit sharper than the metal, so for these you can use the side of your brush just to skim along those edges like that to get that fine highlight. And now the black is highlighted, we can move on to doing the same on the silver details. So using Stormhost Silver, once again we're looking to just pick out all the finer edges in these details just really neatly, just being steady as you can with a small layer brush. And there we are, those details are now completed and we're ready to move on to painting all those decorative elements on the miniature, so the device inside of the bolt gun and also the chest design as well. And for this, rather than using a gold, what we're going to do is go for a really warm yellow, just like it was back in 2nd edition. So for this we need to start out with a base coat of Averland Sunset, then wash over it with Reikland Fleshshade, which is going to give it that warmth. After that we'll return to Averland Sunset to neaten up and then highlight using Yriel Yellow. But first we need to base coat with Averland Sunset, and I'm going to start with that small layer brush right from the beginning here. And for this colour, all we've got to do is block out these areas. So all you've got to do is just make sure your paint's thinned down nicely, and it's just a matter of applying it to those details. So we're looking at the little imperial sigil that's on the side of the bolter, so that is this part right here, and also the design on the chest, and that is this area behind the gun, just around here. Once you've got an even base coat, you're then ready to move on to applying a wash over these details, and for this we need Reikland Fleshshade, which will give it a really warm finish. Once the wash is completely dry, we're then ready to return to Averland Sunset applied as a layer onto these details. And on these wings we just need to be careful to avoid the recessed details, so once again I'm using that small layer brush just to carefully apply it to these areas like this. But you can see the detail inside the bolter, well, the recesses aren't exactly well defined, so when you go into this part it's just a matter of applying it as lines to give the impression of those feathers. And then finally we're ready to move on to Yriel Yellow to apply a highlight to these details. Just looking for those sharper edges, just gently picking them out with this colour, just giving that bright finish, so areas such as just that, and on the design on the bolter, once again just follow the direction of those lines where the feathers are. And there we go, those beautiful yellow designs are now done, and we can move on to the next detail, which is going to be to paint the eye lenses, but also on this particular miniature there's a laurel wreath on the leg armour, and we need to do that as well. We do it all with the same colours at the same time. So we need to base coat first with a dark green, and for this I'm going to use Caliban Green, and then we'll wash over it with some Nuln Oil. After that, to highlight it, what we need is some Warpstone Glow, followed by some Moot Green, and then finally just a very small amount of matte white from the Army Painter. But first of all we need that Caliban Green, and to apply it again I'm sticking to that small layer brush, and with this all you've got to do is block out these details. So first of all, just make sure you've only got a very small amount on your brush for doing those eye lenses, so just checking it on the palette like that. And there we go, and for this what we're looking to do is to paint the entire recess. So this area just here, just let your brush just gently run into that area like that, do the front of it, then change to the other side to do the back of it like that. So this way you can control exactly where the bristles are going to go to fill in the whole area. In addition, on this pose, we've also got this detail on the leg, and it's this wreath just down here. With that base coat done, you're then ready to move on to Nuln Oil, and for this, first of all, for the eyes, all you just need to do is to run it into the entire recess of the eye lens there like that, and on the wreath, just paint it over the entire detail like this. Once the wash is completely dry, we're then ready to move on to Warpstone Glow, and with this colour all you need to do is apply a small amount towards the front of each eye lens, so just around there, like that. Then for the wreath, all you've got to do is pick out the raised areas and just gently apply it to the texture, so you just catch these areas like this. Next, we're ready for some Moot Green, and with this, all we need to do is apply a very small amount at the front of each of these lenses, so very gently just there. And then on the wreath, it's just a matter of picking out the very end of each leaf, just with a small amount of this colour there, like that. And with that, the wreath is done, and all we need to do is apply a very small amount of matte white at the back of each eye, so just a very fine dot to complete the effect. And with that done, at this stage we'd then be ready to paint the base and apply the transfers. But before we do any of that, let's take a look at how it compares to the Blade Guard Veteran. And you can see next to each other, the old one is so much brighter in that red. In fact, he's so bright he makes the modern one look almost like a flesh tearer by comparison. But what we are going to do now is go on to do that base, and to really complete the retro effect, we're going to go for one of those bright green style bases. And for this, the first thing you need to do is to put some sand on it. So to stick the sand on, we need some PVA glue, and I've got some from Army Paints just here. And with this, all you got to do is just get a little dollop onto a palette, and then get hold of an older brush. And I have an old regiment brush here from the Army Painter. And with this, all we got to do is apply this onto the top of the base. So it's just a matter of just painting it on around this area here. Once you've applied the glue, you're then ready to put them into the sand, and all you've got to do is just make sure you get a good coating all across the top of the base there like that. And then it's just a matter of just running your finger around the outside edge to make sure it's clean and neat. And once you've done this, give the miniature about half an hour to dry. Once the glue is dry, we're then ready to add that green colour to it. And back in the day, the colour to use here was Goblin Green, but we can't get hold of that anymore, so the closest approximation in Citadel's range these days is Warboss Green, so that's what we're going to use here. Now to apply it, I'm going to be using that old regiment brush that I used with the PVA glue earlier, and all you've got to do is get some of this onto your palette and then really heavily water it down, because we need it to soak into the sand. So you want it to be very watery, kind of like that. And once it's thinned down like that, all you've got to do is start painting it onto the sand like this, just letting it soak in. Once you've done so, once again, give it about half an hour to dry. Once that green is dry, we're then ready to dry brush it to bring out the texture. And for this, the obvious colour to use is, of course, yellow. So what we're going to do here is dry brush it using some Averland Sunset first of all, followed by some Yriel Yellow. But first we need Averland Sunset, and for this I'm going to be using a hobby dry brush from the Army Painter. All you got to do is just get a small amount on your brush, work it into the bristles on some tissue like this, and then once you've done so and there's not much left on there, it's just a matter of drawing this lightly back and forth across that green texture to pick out the raised areas. And with that done, you're then ready to move on to a second dry brush, this time Yriel Yellow, just to give it a bit more pop. And once done this, you're ready to paint the rim of the base, and for this you should use Warboss Green once again to complete that retro effect, and of course apply the transfers to your miniature. But once you've done so, your retro Blood Angel from 2nd edition 40k is complete. And with the base now fully painted, this Blood Angel Space Marine is complete and ready to take to the battlefields of Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition. So in this video, as you've seen, we had quite a lot of fun going back to this old style, and in fact these models, even though they're really small and in fact look something like space squats compared to a modern Primaris Marine, they are actually really exciting and a huge nostalgia trip for people like me who remember them from when we were little. Now if you're interested in painting old miniatures like this in old colour schemes, then you might want to take a look on the internet for Old Hammer and Middle Hammer, which is a sub-part of the hobby all about painting old miniatures in the old way and playing those old games as well. Whether you do or not, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you all again very soon.